Hello everybody, Jake your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw, it's Monday. On Mondays we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays we wear pink.
We called you in because your first contact with Ficus was a disaster.
Why? Because her smuggling plan backfired and she threatened to kill me?
Yes, every single detail of what you just said.
Today we are talking about buffs, we're talking about nerfs, and everything in between on our Nerf Buff tier list, or Buff Nerf tier list, or Burf tier list. This is our Burf tier list, everybody. What we're going to be talking about are Pokemon that need buffs, Pokemon that need nerfs, and Pokemon that are generally balanced. We obviously have an update coming to the game very soon. The Dragon event is happening. We have our regional finals this weekend, so it's very likely that we see something around next week. It could be early next week for a balance patch, and I think it's time to talk about what should change in Pokemon Unite. In Pokemon Unite, we got it, baby. Let's take a look at our tiers for the week. We have our big buff tier. I would like to see big buffs for these Pokemon, you know? There are some Pokemon that just aren't getting much play, and when I say big buff, I don't mean completely break them, but I would love for a Pokemon to shift up in the meta in some big ways, and we'll talk about it. Our little buff section, these are things that you could just kind of give some stats to, and they'd probably be a lot better. Buff one thing. This is a new category. It's where I kind of want a moveset buffed. I'll talk about that more. We have our B tier. Still got the B tier. Ugh, this is where we're going to put Pokemon that I don't think they should really touch at all. We have our tiny Nerf tier. You get it. And then we have our big Nerf tier. You understand. All right. Where to begin? Let's start with a Pokemon that I think is pretty... Well, okay. Let's start with a Pokemon that will get a Nerf. Let's do that first. This is not going to get a Nerf, but Umbreon should get a Nerf. I don't think you need to gut this Pokemon, but I do think Umbreon could use a tiny Nerf. In fact, all of the Eevees basically fall in its... Where are they? Where are these monsters? Glaceon could get big Nerfs, truthfully. Sylveon could get a Nerf. Espeon could get a Nerf. Where's Leafeon? That absolute demon could get a huge Nerf. Every single evolution in this game are way overpowered. Their leveling is crazy. Their usefulness is ridiculous. I would not be upset seeing any of these changes. What would likely come of this is Leafeon nerfs. Out of all of this, I think that's what we might see are Leafeon nerfs. However, all of these Pokemon could be nerfed, and I'm not saying, again, like gut them, make them unplayable. I don't want that. I want them to still be good. All of these Pokemon could be nerfed and still would be very, very relevant in the game. They're crazy overpowered. Again, they get their moves so early, Unite moves early, they just get good before so many Pokemon in the game, which lets them snowball the entire match. They're so, so strong. Let's see some Pokemon that I think they're probably not going to touch. Some things that are relatively balanced. Who's relatively balanced they're not going to touch? They're not going to touch Pikachu. You could buff a little bit on it, but they're not going to touch Pikachu. It's pretty good, and it's just, it fills the role that it's in. Venusaur is another one. Venusaur actually got some nice inadvertent buffs from Falinks coming out, and I think it's just doing better in all of its builds right now because of that, but in general, there isn't really much you need to do to Venu, right? For Greninja, I think it could look at a little baby buff. The fact of the matter is, Greninja is so dang squishy, which I don't mind, but it's not useful enough for how squishy it is compared to some of the speedsters in the game. I wouldn't want crazy buffs for this thing, but you could maybe buff its stats a little bit, and that wouldn't be nuts, right? Lucario, I don't think they really need to change much. I don't really want them to mess with this Pokemon a ton. It's crazy good. It's not broken like it used to be, but I don't know if we ever need to go back to Lucario being like unbelievably broken. It still has a place in the game. Absol is looking pretty good, still has a place in the game. You wouldn't really need to mess with much. It sees competitive play and it's strong solo too. I think this is solid. Cinderace is a Pokemon that I think could deserve a little baby buff. You could do this Decidueye I would put in the buff one thing category, and this is kind of two things. It would be its moves for Razor Leaf and probably Leaf Storm. You could see buffs for Decidueye in these places, and I don't think that would be crazy at all. You don't need to buff anything on the Spirit Shackle build. Spirit Shackle's really good. Let's see, where do we want to go next? We can keep going with our attackers. Duraludon If you want Duraludon to be relevant in the meta, it's not that it's bad, but it probably could use a buff. A really nice buff would just be making its Unite move not cancelable. Like Cinderace's is not cancelable. I don't know why Duraludon's is. So I think that's a buff that you could absolutely give. Let's see, some more attackers here. Delphox, I don't think they're going to touch it. If anything, they could kind of nerf Fire Spin. I think they overbuffed Fire Spin. I don't think they're going to touch Delphox, but if anything, they could nerf Fire Spin. Guardy's doing good. I wouldn't touch Gardevoir. Doing pretty good. Cram, I would buff one thing. I would probably buff an aspect of the Surf set. You don't need to do a ton to it. It's actually a pretty good mage, and just nobody plays it, but you could do something to the Surf set, and I think that would be pretty good. Dragapult's fine. It's the best auto attacker in the game. You probably don't need to do anything. Maybe you could buff Dragon Dance, but it's totally fine. Candle's doing good. Don't touch Candle. Candle's good. You could give a tiny nerf to Inteleon. Inteleon is for sure overpowered. Especially its Snipe Shot. It's just too powerful. I think you could probably slightly lower the scaling of its critical hit rate across the board. And again, it would still be good, but it could use nerfs. Mew could use nerfs. How do you do it? Well, that's for you to decide. I don't know. I honestly don't know what they would do to Mew. It's one of those Pokemon. It has so much going on with it. And they did nerf it a little while back. I don't think they're going to touch it again. It's crazy good. It's way too good in the hands of a great player, but what are you going to do? Our EX Pokemon. I don't even know where to put these because they're not even playable right now. You could probably nerf Y and X a tiny amount and be okay. As far as Miraidon, you could give it a big nerf to its Electro Drift build. It's not the most crazy broken thing ever, but if you want any of these Pokemon to get competitive play, all of them need nerfs. Because otherwise, Zacian as well, otherwise they just all become insta-bans. And then all of the cool bans that we have in the game just turn into EX bans, which I think is a little eye-rolly, right? All right, where are we at now? Do we have any more attackers? A9. I think you could buff A9 just a little baby bit. I still think you could buff the Dazzling Gleam build a little. You could buff like one thing about A9, and I don't think that would be the end of the world. I think A9 could definitely use a little love. It just, when a Pokemon has a move set that gets absolutely zero play, like Alolan Ninetales, that's when I just think, all right, just do something. Do a little something. All right, who else? Where are we gonna go? Let's do our speedsters here. We got a couple on the board, or at least, yeah, we got a few on the board already. Talon, you could slightly buff it. I know they're not going to. You could honestly slightly tune up Talon just a little bit. They nerfed it a while back, but I don't think they're ever gonna buff Fly for Talon. I would love it if they did. Zeraora. It could use a little baby buff to some of its stats, probably. Not huge. It's pretty good. It just levels weird. It still levels weird. It just takes a while, and I think people don't want to deal with it. Zoroark, you could still nerf Feint Attack a little bit. It's so strong. Zoroark is so strong. You could still nerf it a little bit. Meowscarada, you could probably give it a tiny nerf, but it's not seeing competitive play. So this nerf would mostly be for all other game modes, right? Which is not a bad thing. I don't think you need to nerf Meow super hard, but a small nerf I think would be fair. They took a little attack from it. You could probably take a little something else and it wouldn't be crazy. Like you could make its Unite move do a little less damage, and I don't think that would be the end of the world. Dodrio, I don't think you should nerf it. You already did. I'm biased here, but they've nerfed this Pokemon more than most other speedsters, so I don't think they need to keep nerfing it. Gengar, they could probably buff it a little bit. I don't know how you do it, though. It is a really tricky Pokemon to balance. Really tricky, because it's so dang good once you get going. Like, once you're on a KO streak with it, it will wipe a whole team. So if you buff its stats too high, you know, or you buff its move so it does just too much damage, all of a sudden it just runs through the enemy team. You might be able to give it some more survivability buffs like they did a little while back. That might be okay. Scyther, I think, is mostly fine. I wouldn't touch it. It could use a slight buff maybe, but I think it's mostly fine. And it sees comp play, and it does well solo. I think Scyther's doing okay. Let's move on to our all-rounders here. Scissor, good. They buffed it a little while back, and the buffs were good. Happy for Scissor. Happy for Scissor mains. Charizard. Charizard's a Pokemon that's like, this is in buff territory. Please buff this thing. You could buff its stats. You could give it its true damage back. You could make its Unite not cancelable. You could make the Fire Punch build a little more reliable, because you're going into enemies with tons of crowd control, so I don't know how you make that build that useful, but I mean, you compare this to like some of the other all-rounders in the game. Even though there are some good Char builds and Char can carry, this thing is just a forgotten Pokemon by the devs. They've like completely forgotten Char, which is wild. Garchomp, I would buff its Dig Earthquake set. I think that would be great. Machamp could still use buffs. It could use little buffs. And like the Machamp buffs were kind of a joke, honestly. I thought they would be sort of cool. They're not. They're not very useful at all. You could buff this Pokemon again. Dragonite's doing good. I don't think you need to mess with it. You could, if you buff one thing, it's extreme speed, but it's got to be minor because that turns into a broken CC chain, right? Zarina, don't touch it. It's good, and I don't want to see Zarina again. Aegislash, you need to change Iron Head. Iron Head doesn't make sense in this game right now. There are too many things that hit with multiple ticks of damage. It needs kind of a complete rework, or at least when you cast Iron Head, when you use your move, it needs to tank every single instance of damage in that short time frame. Then, okay, it's like just an invulnerability frame for Aegislash. I could see that. But what it's doing right now is it tanks a single tick of damage. Anything. It could be an auto. It could be anything. And whatever else hits it, it just wrecks it. It definitely needs a buff. Azu. Azu's doing good. Honestly, Azu's like kind of slept on right now. I think Azumarill's doing pretty dang good. Buzzwole, I think it's still good, but I would be careful. If you're going to do anything, you could maybe buff the Leech Life build. I don't know exactly how you do it. Maybe instead of like a single instance of a crowd control effect, like a knockup or a stun, maybe instead of that, stopping it, maybe it almost has a very small version of Mimikyu's Unite, where you have to hit it a couple times, or you have to do a certain amount of damage to it to break it. That something like that could be a possibility. I don't know. It would be nice to do something. T-Tar, you could buff T-Tar. In fact, compared to the other all-rounders, and I like T-Tar, you could give T-Tar big buffs. And what I would want to see from this is this Pokemon able to be good enough to deserve its early game, right? Because one of the biggest imbalances inside of Unite in general are Pokemon that are too good in like the state of game that they're in, like the phase of the game they're in. So like the Eevees, all of the Eevees are too good early because they're not bad late. It's this weird thing. You think they would be, okay, crazy good early, but kind of whatever late. They're not. They're just great early and then pretty dang good late. Tyranitar is abysmal early. One of the worst Pokemon, not the worst, but one of the worst in the game. It lasts a really long time, and even once it evolves, it's not like it's so much better than other things. So you could really do a lot with Tyranitar if you want to make it strong like some of the other all-rounders they have put into the game, especially recently, right? Let's see. Water Bear, you could do small buffs to Water Bear. Dark Bear, I think, is doing fine. It's not these aren't super high played right now. Dark Bear is pretty consistently good. Water Bear, on the other hand, I think they gutted it too hard. They really did. Blaziken, they will not do this. We just found out there's Blaziken Hollowware coming, maybe even the Battle Pass. You could give a tiny nerf to Blaziken. They won't do it, but you could. You could give a tiny nerf and a tiny buff to Mimikyu. So I would love it if they made Trick Room a little bit better. It's kind of troll compared to Shadow Sneak. And you could also nerf Shadow Sneak. Like, both of those things are pretty reasonable. So I'll probably put it down in the tiny nerf section, but just know that you could also see a buff for this, and that would be very fair. Metagross, you don't need to mess with it. It's doing good. Gyarados could definitely use a nerf. It's teetering into the big nerf category, honestly. Gyarados is really good. Yeah, it's really good. And it's like, it's right here. Like, technically this would be the top of it, right? But it's right here between these two. I don't want them to gut it. I hate when they gut Pokemon. So I'm putting it in the tiny Nerf area, but even in the big Nerf area, mostly this is just like, these need Nerfs badly, more than big Nerfs. Like, they just really need Nerfs, right? In that sense, I could see putting Gyarados right here. And there's a few others. You can put Umbreon. Umbreon can be right here too. Let's see. Falinks. Yeah, you can Nerf Falinks. Falinks is really good. It's really, really, really good. It does too much damage. And it's really tanky. And it's hard to deal with. However, it's got a lot of counters, which is cool. So I want them to nerf it, but I also want them to keep it relevant in the game so that all those counters have time to shine. So in general, I guess I'm kind of looking at this as a tiny nerf. It also just got released, so I don't think you want to gut like a new exciting release right away. Supporters. Sableye could buff one thing, Shadow Sneak. That's it. It's got to be really minor. Please don't break this thing. I already regret putting it there. Mr. Mime, I think it's fine. Mime's fine. Mime's fine. Blissey, you could nerf it a little bit. Probably its Unite move. It's a little too good. LD just got nerfs. I'm going to leave it alone, even though I still think it's crazy good. I'm going to leave it alone. It just got nerfs. Hoopa just got buffs, and it's good. Hoopa's really good. Comfey, it's the most stupid thing ever. You could delete it from the game, and I'd be happy. Honestly, if the patch notes came out, listen to me. Okay. Listen up. If the patch notes came out tomorrow and it was simply that they deleted Comfey from the game, that's one of the best patches you've ever made. Ever. That would be one of the best you've ever made. Clefable, I don't think you need to touch it. They already nerfed it a little while back. Wiggly, it's good. I wouldn't really mess with it. You could give a tiny buff maybe to its Unite, but it's a dangerous one because it's a team-wide shield. So, careful. Be careful. On to our defenders. Crustle. You give Crustle tiny nerf. It's crazy good. You give Tree some nerfs. It's crazy good. You give Blastoise some nerf. Like, you look, dude. Some of these defenders are gross, man. They're gross. Crustle, Tree, Blastoise are so tanky, so powerful in lane, just like so useful. I don't want them to, again, I don't want anything to get gutted and be unplayable, but these are crazy good Pokemon right now. Snorlax, doing pretty good. Slowbro. Slowbro might see a buff, by the way, because it's got Hollowware coming. I think it's got purple tier Hollowware coming. I don't think it's the Battle Pass. I think the Battle Pass is going to be Blaziken. So that means that you could see a buff for this. Mamo could probably use a tiny little baby buff. Greedent could use some serious love. You could even rework. I'd be interested in hearing a rework for Greedent that made it more of a defender. Or you need to kind of buff this thing because it's in a weird, irrelevant place in the meta. Goodra could use some slight buffs. And Lapras, in my opinion, Lapras is one of the weirdest ones. I'm going to put it in the little buff category because I don't think the buffs need to be amazing, but it's actually shocking to me that Lapras got nerfed and none of the other defenders really got touched. Like, Lapras got nerfs across the board basically, and none of the other defenders got touched. If you want to make a cool change to Lapras, maybe make its crowd control moves have a lower cooldown so you're not increasing damage or anything like that. You're just giving it more options to crowd control enemies to make it feel like more of a defender rather than like kind of this like tanky all-rounder carry Pokemon. I think that's like a cool way to change it. But in general, Lapras was over-nerfed in comparison to the other defenders on the roster. So I definitely think you could buff it. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think deserves a buff that I missed or deserves a nerf that I missed as well? Thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening. I can't wait to see what this patch will bring. I love you all, and I'll see you all next time. We did it.